Next up, we have Courtney Pentland, and she is going to be talking to us about virtual author visits, cheap and easy, which should interest a lot of us out there. And I can't wait to hear what you had to say about this. She is with Omaha Public Schools, as you can see on her slide there, and I will let her tell us about virtual author visits.
Well, thank you. I am currently one of the lead teachers in our district library offices, but prior to that I was the high school librarian at Burke High School, and that's kind of where this virtual author visit journey started for us. I'll kind of go through our process and what we did and how other people can duplicate the same system if they would like. This used to be called more of a Skype and author program, but you can really use any kind of conferencing program that you want to use. Skype just seems to be familiar to people, and it's not very expensive to use. So when I say Skype throughout the program, it's just whatever program you feel you want to use instead. We did choose to start doing a Skype program with our book club members at Burke High School because what I found was we had a very, very small number of book club members. We only had about 4 or 5 students who were in our book club, and that was not what I was hoping for. We were hoping for a few more people, and the people that I did have in the book club didn't really want to discuss things. They just kind of showed up and they had their lunch and they stared at the table, and I'd ask questions and they would mumble responses. They just weren't really into that interaction with each other. So that was another element of it. Plus we had to do our book club during the day. We had a lot of people who were interested in doing so, but they were in other after-school activities. So we had to try and figure out a way to increase membership, interest those students who wanted to be in it. Plus we found that the Skype visits are much, much, much less expensive than having an author come out to the school for the day. So for example, an author visit with certain authors can be up to $1,300 per day just for the visit. And that doesn't include expenses like hotels, meals, airplane travel, so you add all of that onto it, and it can get pretty pricey. So the Skype visits are definitely much more affordable, and we'll talk about prices here in a little bit. Plus it was a great chance for my students to meet more authors than just one per school year. With the way that we had it set up before, if we did an in-person visit, that kind of took our budget for the year. Whereas with the Skype visits, we could have multiple authors that students could meet with. So there are quite a few reasons why we decided to use Skype. A lot of questions have to come up with how we are able to afford to do this program. We are very lucky. We do have a grant funding system that we have about $1,800 per school per year to do the author visits, which is how some of those in-person visits are funded. But you don't have to have that to be able to do Skype visits. A lot of the Skype visits are pretty affordable. There are authors who will do them for free. There are authors who will do them for between $75 and $150 for an hour. So it's not that big of a money commitment for that type of it. And as far as the books go, we are lucky again to be in a large district, so sometimes we can share materials between buildings. But we've also used book loan programs through our library system office or through our public library. There are some ways to get those books that don't have to involve grant funding. So there are some options for that as well. The program has grown in the last few years. The first year that I started this would have been 3 years ago. I was approached by another high school librarian who wanted to do one Skype visit, and he asked if I would be interested in doing it with him. And I thought, you know, hey, one Skype visit is great. What if we did more? So the first year we actually ended up with doing 4 authors. We had 2 per semester. And then the second year at Burke we had 6 authors. We had 3 per semester. And we had such luck with it. I started out, like I said, with about 5 students. And then we moved on to, I want to say, our second year I had upwards of 45 to 50 students who were on our list to contact to see if they'd be interested in reading and speaking with the author. So quite a huge jump in 2 years. We'd had such success that some of the other high schools wanted to try the same experience and see if it would work. So we had 6 high schools out of our district who were interested in doing so. And so 6 schools equals 6 authors. It was just easier to split it up that way because the way the cost was covered, each school paid for their individual author visits, that fee. And then we purchased a pool of 80 books per author from our grant money that would be split between the 6 buildings. That cost was shared between the 6 buildings. And then they would rotate the books each month from school to school to school. So we had 3 authors in the fall, September, October, and November, and then 3 visits in the spring in February, March, and April. And this is our first year. We're just finishing up our first year with all 6 of the high schools, which was very exciting. Another question a lot of people ask is how do we find the authors for these visits? I started out using the Skype and Author Network, and you'll see their website listed on the page here. That was a really great jumping off point because this is a service where authors go on and say they are interested in doing Skype visits. The only problem that I have with this site is that it is listed alphabetically and it is not by grade level. So you have to go into each individual person's name to find out what they've written and what grade levels they prefer speaking to and what types of visits they will do, which is incredibly time consuming, and I outsourced it to some of my student aides. I had them go through the names and look for who they thought would be YA authors, and then I went through each of those and tried to evaluate, you know, if I thought there would be interest and if we would have access to materials. What we've done in the last 2 years now is just kind of brainstormed who we would love to have, and then we go out and look at the author's webpage and we look for any school visit information that they might have on there. Some people will say that they do Skype visits and how much it will cost. Sometimes we just directly email the author if it's not listed there, or their publicist or publisher, depending on how they prefer to be contacted. And I just send out a general query email that says, you know, we'd be interested in having you do Skype visits with 6 high schools. We would need 1 a month. These are the times that we would need them for, and see if people are available. And I think this year I sent out about 25 to 30 emails to authors, and I heard back from roughly 12 to 15 of them. And that's pretty typical. There's some authors that just don't return emails, and they'll tell you that on their site. There are some people that there is no contact information for them, so you just can't get a hold of them. And some people, you know, you are able to get a hold of. How do we choose then of those authors who we want to work with? I really try to make sure we have a variety of genres represented. We don't want to have all fantasy. We don't want to have all realistic fiction. We want to be able to reach a wide audience. So we try to mix up the types of books that we're reading. It does generally tend to skew a little bit more towards that sci-fi fantasy because that's what the students are requesting, but we do try to mix some other things in there. I try to have at least 1 male author each year. There just are more female authors out there and more of them that do Skype. So having male authors, that's a big piece for us, is to have at least 1 guy. And then we really try to have some multicultural authors for this next year. That was one of our goals, was to add that in, because we are a district that has a lot of diversity. So we wanted to be able to have that piece to reflect our students as well. And then we really looked at student choice. So we asked students, who would you like to have? Who would you like to talk to? And those were some of the people we contacted. Now, every single year they ask me, they say, we want to talk to John Green. And I say, you know what? That would be fantastic. I have contacted his publicist twice a year, every year, for the past 3 years. I will continue to do so. But generally, the email I get back from her is, Mr. Green's schedule does not fit with doing Skype visits right now. Please check back again in the future. And I continue to do so, hoping that maybe someday he will have some time for us. You know, and the same thing comes up with like James Patterson and some of those other big name people, and we say, you know what, we're willing to try and ask, but don't get your hopes up on some of those. And then a lot of it comes down to cost. How much is this author visit going to be? I think the most expensive person we ever paid for was $500 an hour, and then we do have free people. We've had people are $75 for an hour, $88 an hour. You know, but they're typically between $150 and $300 for the hour, depending on the author. And then, of course, that availability. With us doing 6 schools, we have, and the schools sharing the books, we have to have kind of a set schedule as to when we can do certain visits at certain times. So if they're not available within those windows, then we have to pick somebody else. So that's kind of our decision process. These are the authors that we spoke with in the first year, those first 4 authors, Paul Volpani, Jennifer Brown, Jennifer Bradbury, and Sarah Czar. And keep in mind these are all high school that are doing this, but some of these authors also write for kids as well, and I'll kind of point that out as to who those people are. And that was a very, very successful first year. All of those authors were great to talk to. They had interesting stories. They worked with teams in different ways, and how they came to be authors was very, very interesting. I would recommend any one of them for Skype visits. For the next year, we had another offering of authors. Suzanne Selfers actually writes children's books as well, so she would be a good elementary or middle school person. Terry Hall was great. Her dystopian series is not as well known, but it was a really interesting conversation for our students. Lisa McMahon also writes elementary-ish middle school type titles, so she would be a good one for that, as well as does Neil Schusterman. He was our expensive guy. He's $500 an hour because he's Neil Schusterman, so just keep that in mind. And then we were very lucky to have Rainbow Rowell come out to Burke and speak to our students in person that year as well. And Janet Fox was fantastic. She does free visits, at least she was doing so at the time, and her historical fiction novels are really interesting. Just this past year, these are the authors that the 6 schools shared, and I was lucky enough to be able to go out and see almost all of them. Elizabeth Yulberg was the one I didn't get to see, but I heard great things from her and from the schools, so that one was really well done. Jackson Pierce, again, really connected with the students very well, just a wonderful experience for the students. Todd Strasser did so too. He has written over 100 books, and some of them are at the elementary level, and some are middle school, and some are high school, so he could be a wide range to look at. Marissa Meyer was also incredibly interesting, especially because she started out writing fan fiction and did NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month, and that's kind of how she got started. Elaine Ferguson with the Christopher Killer series, and she has a new series coming out soon. She is an absolute hoot. She tells the most interesting stories about how she got her ideas and how she worked with the storylines and where the names came from for the people in the book and all of that. And then again, we were incredibly lucky to have Rainbow Rowell come out and do visits with all of our high schools this year, which was a huge, huge thing for us. And I know with her schedule coming up, I don't know how often she's going to do visits here in the future. We also had April Henry talk to a couple of our middle schools. We had some 8th grade classes that read Girls Stolen, and she was also incredibly interesting to watch because she talked about how all of her books are kind of taken from the headlines, and she talks about the specific news cases and how she found whatever inspiration pieces she had for the books that she wrote, and she was incredibly interesting. She has a new series that's coming out as well. And then Rochelle Mead, her publicist, contacted us, and they were doing free visits with schools, and we had a couple jump on that and added her to their offerings this year. So she was doing some free visits. I'm not sure if she still is, but the Vampire Academy movie and books are super popular, then the Bloodline series, and then her new Age of X series. So those are the people we had this year. And we just had the best response from the new schools who had tried to do it. They said this was the best thing that they had done this year. They had such a great reaction from their students. You know, I attended as many of the visits as I could. We had one school, there were, I think, close to 50 students who were there for the author visit, and some of them, you know, different visits, they would have 10 to 15 depending on the interest in the author and the availability of the student schedules. And typically, these author visits occur over their lunch period, generally from anywhere between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock during the day, and they last 45 minutes to an hour. So if a student has a test that day or something going on, they just cannot attend. These are our possible authors for next year. We've kind of locked in the people on the left, Kendara Blake, Simone Elquist, I think is how you should say her name, Lauren Cates, Paul Volpani, and Cindy Pon. We had such a great time with Paul Volpani our first year, and it was only at the one school, so we decided to add her again. I only have 5. I'm working on a 6th person currently, and it will come from the list on the right. And the reason for that is we had someone who was lined up who now is not able to do the visits. Something has come up for them, and so we're trying to find a replacement. And that's, again, why I kind of send out 25 to 30 emails each year trying to figure out who's available so that if we have this issue come up, we can have some options. We've also had a similar problem the last 2 years where we've had someone say, you know, hey, I would love to do this, let me know. And so once we've made our decision as a group of 6 who we want to have, I'll email out to the authors, and there's been a couple just randomly where I never heard back from them again. So we had to go with another option. And that is a pretty rare thing that happens. Usually they jump right on it and try to get things scheduled. But that's kind of where we're at for this year. So hopefully you have a few author names to be able to go look at. And I don't want to tell you too much about how much people cost because they may have changed over the years. But you can obviously contact them directly or their publicist to find out a little bit more. So how it works for us, this is what the students have to do to be able to participate in the author visit. They have to read a book by the author. And again, we've borrowed books from different places, from other schools. We were able to, through our grant, make large purchases this year and for next year so that we can share the books. If there are any meetings, we ask that the students attend. Generally, when I did this at Burke, the students, some of them would come to meetings, some of them would not. We didn't really have a schedule or an agenda. They could just come and chat and hang out if they wanted to. But the bulk of what they did was actually at the author visit. And they had to come to the author visit with 3 questions in mind. They had to have them written down that they would want to ask the author, either related to the book that they read, the writing process, how they became a writer. As long as it was school appropriate, I didn't really care what they asked. And I never had an experience in the 2 years I did it at my school or in watching any of the visits from this year have I had a student ask a question that was inappropriate. So, you know, generally they kind of understand the importance of what they're doing and they ask good questions. They also need to get permission from their teacher to miss class, because it is during class time that we do so. And if their teacher says no, their teacher says no. We have had an increase in membership in book clubs across the district. We have schools that started book clubs because of this. So kind of really fun that way. The students are really excited about discussing the books and the author information that they learned. They really, really enjoy that interaction piece between them and the author. And it was a chance for students at Burke who started with me as freshmen. They would be graduating Next year, they will have had the chance to hear from or talk to over 20 authors while they're in high school. And the group after them, that second year when I started was 6, they would have 24. How many students can say that they've talked to 24 professionally published young adult authors in their lifetime, let alone in their high school career? So it's a really, really fantastic opportunity that we are able to provide for our students. And some of our librarians' reactions, they really loved that they could have their students who were interested in writing see that people with regular, normal jobs who, you know, just kind of worked really hard at writing were able to get published and talk about all of that. And then I had a couple schools who were a little nervous. They weren't sure if they wanted to do this or not. They were worried about the technology, if it would work, if they were going to have students come, how all of it was going to go. But each time that they did it, they got more and more excited. So that was a really, really fun experience to watch how that worked in multiple schools. Here's my contact information in relation to how you can get a hold of me. We did kind of type up something a couple years ago for the Eastern Library System. That would have been when I was still at Burke a couple years. I think it was the second year that we did the program. So there's some information in there as well because we borrowed book bags from the Eastern Library System to help us kind of offset the cost. So I guess that's kind of our process and how it works for us. But again, anybody could do this. The public library, one of our public libraries, contacted me to get some information about how we did everything, and they had their first Skype author visit here just a couple months ago because they wanted to be able to add some more programming for their teams. So that's definitely a partnership. You could maybe even get together with your public library to see how you all could support each other that way. And then the public library reaching out to the schools if they wanted to host a Skype visit at the public library and making that information and knowledge available to the schools for that. And again, you don't have to do it just for high schools. There are plenty of authors. There are a lot more elementary picture book level authors on that Skype and author network than there are secondary. So there's quite a few people out there who are willing to do those things for free. So that's all I have on how we do it. I guess at this point I'd ask if there are any questions.
Okay, we're muted.
Oh, I had a question. Have you partnered with any of the teachers you're working with to give the children credit, the students credit? Do they get any kind of class credit for it, or is it just kind of for enrichment?
It's more just for enrichment. We haven't done it as course credit because it's on an individual selection basis. So maybe a student sees 2 of the authors in the fall because they are not interested in whatever the other person's writing, and then they come back and join us in the spring. So it's an optional thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's amazing. I had a couple of boys I was convinced would not read like the more girl
Yeah.
trending books, you know, like the very, very chick pick type books. And one of them, he's like, yeah, I'll read it. I don't care, you know, and he carried it around and read it. He didn't care at all. And I had a couple who were like, yeah, whatever it is, I'll read it. I don't, you know. And the other thing I was most proud of, I think, with how our book club grew is we had special education students, we had Asian American students, African American students, we had Hispanic students, we had ESL students, we had a hearing impaired student. We had 9th graders through 12th graders. It was just this great group of kids who were really enthusiastic about reading that kind of came together once a month to celebrate something that they loved, but they were all so vastly different from each other in so many ways. But they loved getting together to do this. So it kind of branched them out. And they made really good friends with each other. So it was lovely to see that.
Thank you so much. That just sounds very inspiring.
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions for Courtney while we have her on the line here still? Type them into your questions section of your GoToWebinar interface if you do. If not, her contact info and her presentation also will be available afterwards along with the recordings of the meeting. No, doesn't look like anything urgent is coming in. So,
All right.
all right. Thank you so much, Courtney.
No problem.